I didn't know a single sentence could change the temperature of an entire airplane, but that morning it did. One loud, irritated voice from the front said, "What's the problem now?" I didn't pay extra to sit behind a mess, and just like that, the cabin stopped breathing. You could feel it, that sharp pause, like the world was deciding whether it was about to look away, or finally look straight at what was happening. My name's Maya. I was 10 years old then, small for my age, knees barely bending over the seat edge, feet not even touching the floor. I was sitting next to my dad Leon, who was trying very hard not to scare me even though his breathing sounded wrong. Not dramatic, not movie style, gasping, just slow, uneven, like every breath had to be negotiated. I remember thinking, this is what it sounds like when something is breaking quietly. We were on a flight from Phoenix to Chicago, nothing fancy, middle of the day, one of those flights where people already feel entitled to complain. The man who spoke up sat in the first row of first class. His name, I'd later hear, was Grant Whitmore. Late 40s, confident posture, expensive jacket draped like he owned the aisle. He kept checking his watch, sighing loudly, making sure everyone noticed how important his time was. When a flight attendant stopped near our row, asking if everything was okay, Grant leaned out and said, if he's sick, he shouldn't be flying. That's common sense. He didn't say my dad's name. He didn't say man, just he. Like my dad was an object that came with a problem. The attendant tried to keep her voice calm, said they were just checking. My dad squeezed my hand real light, like he was apologizing for existing. That's when something in my chest started to burn. Not anger yet, more like awareness. I realized right then that adults could decide you were a problem just because you were inconvenient. Grant kept going. "This isn't a hospital," he said. "I have meetings, real responsibilities." He laughed a little, shaking his head like we were ridiculous. People around us shifted. A woman across the aisle stared straight ahead. Someone pulled out their phone but angled it down, pretending to scroll. Nobody said a word. I leaned toward the aisle and told the attendant, "My dad can't breathe right." My voice shook, but I said it anyway. Grant heard me. He looked straight at me and smiled, not kindly. "Sweetheart," he said, "this isn't how the world works. You don't hold up an entire plane because you're emotional." Emotional? Like my dad's lungs were throwing a tantrum. Then my dad coughed. Hard. His shoulders jerked forward, and the sound that came out of him made my stomach drop. I grabbed his arm. "Dad," I whispered, trying to sound older than I was. Grant rolled his eyes so dramatically I thought they might get stuck. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "This airline has no control." Something shifted inside me. Fear was still there, but it wasn't alone anymore. I stood up. My legs felt like rubber, but I stood anyway. The aisle felt way longer than it should have. Every face turned toward me, and for a second I wished I could disappear into the carpet. But I didn't. I said louder this time, "My dad needs help." Grant laughed. Not loud. Worse. Dismissive. "Oh, great," he said. "Now we're doing a show." I didn't look at him. I knelt down right there in the aisle next to my dad's seat. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Phones came up, not subtle anymore. I clasped my hands together because I didn't know what else to do, and I said, "Please, he's not okay." I didn't plan it. It just came out. Simple. Honest. The kind of truth that doesn't care if it's embarrassing. The cabin went quiet. Like painfully quiet. Even Grant stopped talking for a second. The flight attendant's eyes filled with tears, and she took a step closer. But then Grant clapped. Slow, sarcastic. Well, he said that was dramatic. He leaned back and said this was exactly what happened when airlines let emotions override rules. He stood up, then pointed at me, pointed at my dad. "This is unsafe," he announced. "I want this documented. I want names. Medical diversions cost money, and I'm not paying for this delay." When the attendant hesitated just a fraction of a second, he smiled. That smile told me he'd won these moments before. He thrived on hesitation. I felt panic flood my chest when he said he wanted security. I shook my head, said we didn't do anything wrong. He looked down at me and said flat and cold, "Sit down. Adults are talking." My dad whispered my name, barely audible. I told him I was there. I wasn't going anywhere. The attendant turned away, tapping on her tablet, sending requests waiting for approval that kept floating somewhere above us instead of landing where it was needed. The plane didn't move. Grant relaxed into his seat like he'd restored order. "See," he said. "Procedure." That's when I broke. Not loudly. Completely. I bowed my head, pressed my forehead against my hands, and whispered, "Please don't let him go." I thought that was it. I thought the moment would pass and nothing would change. Grant thought so too. I lifted my head and looked toward the cockpit. I didn't know why. I just knew waiting hadn't worked. Grant noticed. He started pressing the call button over and over, standing again, raising his voice, talking about lawsuits and negligence. Phones were everywhere now. No one was pretending anymore. Then the cockpit door opened. The captain stepped out calm, unhurried. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He took in the whole scene. Me kneeling, my dad slumped Grant standing too tall to raised phones. His eyes met mine and something happened in that look. Recognition. Responsibility. He asked everyone to remain seated. When Grant opened his mouth, the captain raised a hand and said, "Sir, sit down." And Grant did. Reluctantly, but he did. The captain knelt near my dad, asked the attendant what happened, listened without interrupting. Then he looked at me and said quietly, "You did the right thing. I didn't even know I needed to hear that until my throat tightened." He announced the plane wasn't moving. Medical services were on their way, and then he turned to Grant and said, "You're being removed from this flight." Grant exploded. Talked about rights influence consequences. The captain didn't raise his voice. He said my dad's rights had been ignored. Crew members stepped forward. Grant walked down the aisle with his shoulders tight, muttering that it wasn't over. I didn't look at him. I was watching my dad breathe. Paramedics boarded. Oxygen hissed. One of them told me I did the right thing. I cried then. Really cried. Later in the hospital, my dad held my hand and told me I was brave. I told him I just stayed. He smiled and said, "Sometimes that's how you win." After that, things happened quietly. Reports, reviews, changes. No speeches. Just accountability moving where silence used to live. And I learned something I'll carry forever. Dignity doesn't always stand tall. Sometimes it kneels, holds on, and refuses to disappear. So let me ask you something. When you see someone being treated like a problem instead of a person, what do you do? Do you look away or do you stay? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Argue with me if you want. Tell me what you've seen. Because the line between right and wrong isn't always loud, but it's always watching to see who speaks up.